I could have been an actor, but I wound up here. I just have to look good. I don't have to be clear. Come and whisper in my ear. Give me dirty laundry.
That is kind of a rocking little number, if I do say so myself. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where the men are men, the women are women, and the sheep still walk a little bit funny. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the Blast Radius. Here is your Decline of Western Civilization News Roundup for the first week of October in the year 2023. Dateline, Oxford, England, United Kingdom, Monday, 2 October. And yes, I probably should preface this one by saying that on a show called The Blast Radius, stories about explosions always get pride of place in the news roundup. But having said that, witnesses reported a huge fireball Monday night after an apparent explosion at a local power generating facility in Oxford. And I know you're thinking this is one of those cases where Occam's razor should govern, because since by now we are all habituated to thinking, okay, strange explosion, power plant, well, obviously it's climate cult eco-loony terrorist types, right? It's as obvious as some dumb kid gluing himself to a tennis court, for God's sake. But it turns out, strangely enough, the climate cultists are off the hook this time, because in the actual event, the power plant was struck by lightning, which, if there was a dirtbag eco-loony climate cultist here with us, he might say, quote, you know, man, maybe this is just Gaia, the Earth Mother, committing her own act of eco-terrorism, man. Maybe this is her saying, you know, you guys, like, you got to fix that climate crisis, man, because science, unquote. Dateline, Washington, Tuesday, 3 October, in a development that literally no one could have seen coming. Representative Henry Cuellar, Democrat of Texas, was carjacked at gunpoint by mostly peaceful criminals outside his mostly peaceful apartment complex in our nation's mostly peaceful capital city, Washington, D.C. And by mostly peaceful, we mean, hey, on nearly every day of the year, a sitting congressman is not robbed at gunpoint outside his apartment building, so give us a little credit here, unquote. For his part, Representative Cuellar explained that he knew exactly what to do in this particular situation because he has a black belt in Kung Fu. Ladies and gentlemen, I am not making that up. The man really did say that, because apparently there is some really fancy technique for saying, here are the keys, please God don't hurt me, that you can only learn by gaining a black belt in Kung Fu. But now you know. And as a wise cartoon character once said, knowing is half the battle, unquote. Dateline, London, Wednesday, 4 October. British actor and dangerous domestic extremist Lawrence Fox already declared an enemy of the state for having political views that cause hurt feelings among the soft, whingy douchebags in the media political establishment. He had his home raided and searched, and he was then duly hauled off to jail this week for the crime of gently implying that people destroying government surveillance cameras might not be the worst thing in the world. And that's all it takes to get raided and hauled off to jail in the United Kingdom, the world's cradle of liberal democracy. Here in the second year of the reign of His Britannic Majesty, King Charles III. And as is so often the case, if you take the same fact pattern and just change the political context a little tiny bit, like say, if you're a person who, I don't know, cheers on BLM and Antifa rioters as they burn down your local city, because dang it, sometimes you just got to break some stuff and possibly steal some iPhones in order to get social justice. And if you said that on social media every day for several years, well, we know absolutely nothing would ever happen. But take a different version of that same theorem and apply it differently in the form of, well, I think free citizens who live in a free country have the right not to be surveilled by the state. And it's a good and proper thing for social justice that these spy cameras be smashed into atoms. Well, then you get to be just like Lawrence Fox, and you get to have the local bobbies rooting around in your underwear drawer, hauling you off to the pokey and charging you with something called conspiracy to cause malicious damage to government property. And why? Well, because they didn't like your tweet. Just tweet better things and we won't have a problem in the future, Mr. Fox. Unquote. Dateline St. Louis, Thursday, 5 October. A 28-year-old high school English teacher has resigned from her job after it was discovered that she's a digital prostitute, OnlyFans model, in her spare time. Brianna Coppage, who taught 10th grade English at St. Clair High School until being placed on administrative leave 2 weeks ago, said she decided to resign because she didn't want to cause a distraction. And besides, now she's going to have lots more time to devote to her formerly part-time career of digital prostitution. OnlyFans modeling. Reached for comment. The part of your brain that controls your common sense responses said, quote, well, when you're someone who sticks things up your butt on camera for cash and you now seek to make a full-time job out of doing that, I'm not sure I believe you when you say you don't want to be a distraction. Also, you should probably consider running as a Democrat for the Virginia House of Delegates. End quote. Dateline Washington, Friday, 6 October. The Washington Free Beacon reported this week that Planned Parenthood, at least one New Jersey location and presumably elsewhere, is dispensing cross-sex hormones to any person over age 18 who says they have gender confusion and is willing to go through a 30-minute consultation. The Free Beacon relates the story of a young man they call Fred, diagnosed with severe autism at the age of 4. Then at the age of 17, in December of last year, Fred decides he is a trans woman now. Shortly after his best friend, also a 17-year-old with severe autism, announced that he, too, is now a trans woman. And the parents, well, they did try really hard to be terrible parents, so you can't take that away from them. They promptly took Fred down to the local child transgender clinic. And it says a lot when even those ghoulish Frankensteinian maniacs turn you away. The people who look for any and every reason to feed your kid into the transgender medicine meat grinder, even they said, no, God, we can't start transing this 17-year-old autistic kid just because he said he wants to be a girl. That's crazy. It'll probably pass. Maybe come back in a year and then we'll talk. But then Fred turns 18 and his parents go away for the weekend. 30 minutes and one visit to Planned Parenthood later, a nurse practitioner has described him estrogen. So the thing that even the sick, evil bastards at the child transgender clinic refuse to do, Planned Parenthood has absolutely no qualms about it. Planned Parenthood says, yep, here you go, 18-year-old autistic kid. Here is your permanently life-altering course of hormone treatment. And this is called healthcare. End quote. And that's your Decline of Western Civilization News Roundup for the first week of October 2023. I hope it left you feeling lightheaded and slightly out of breath. And now I kick it back over to my distinguished co-host, the hominid with the bominid, the one and only, Mr. CaucAsian Sasquatch.
It's
Tactical nuke incoming!
all right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to sit here directly on this screen for exactly a minute and 30 seconds while he puts together some tiny issues he has happening with his background, which is great for a blooper reel. How are we doing this evening, everybody? Welcome into the Blast Radius. As you know, we do this whole thing about once a week. Barring last week, I have to apologize for my absence. I was a naughty, naughty boy, and I will be releasing a full-on YouTube apology video for my transgressions against society and all of the horrible things I did.
You've just got to start being less hateful, man.
Dude, I mean, it was a woman coming out on top. What can I say? I was seduced by the powers of the dark side.
You and your constant bigotry. I don't know how we all tolerate it.
Well, I try to give everybody a fair warning. I mean, right out of the gate, I tell you, my name is CaucAsian Sasquatch, man. You're supposed to put your dono and merch links right here. How you doing, bud?
Very well, thank you, kind sir. How are you? How was your week?
Oh, it was pretty good. I had me a nice week off because, reasons. So
because you did a naughty and got yourself sent to the penalty box.
I will full on admit to having done a dumb. They caught me slipping. The facts match the case, and in the spirit of this, I removed all inkling of me from any possibility of appearing on YouTube, even by accident. Because I don't know exactly where they draw that line. Supposedly I can come on as a guest to other shows, but in this case we kind of co-established this show, and so I don't know if that counts as my content or your content or how that works. So I figured better safe than sorry.
I still think you would have been fine with an assumed name.
I think so. I think it would have been fine. But what can you do? By the way, Captain Curmudgeon is fully powered by coffee and awesome.
It's true.
Yep.
Maybe one day I'll have my own coffee brand where I can throw in a little pitch right here when you say that.
I got that's not it. I got a different thing. Nope, that's not it either. Why is everything wrong? When did it go right?
I could write a song around that line.
Right? We can do this, then this. No,
hi, Swiss Miss. Good to see you.
That doesn't work. Why is it doing that? Do this, then this. Yay! You know what's messed up is I practiced that crap right before we went live, and it worked flawlessly.
You did. I was here. I saw it.
I did it 3 times in a row so that I would know exactly what to do, and instead I ended up with the wrong thing. All right, bud. What's our first topic for the night? What do you want to go into?
Swiss Miss just brought up Washington, D.C. I have an open question about that fair city that I would like to pose. Hey, Scotty, good to see you. To whoever happens to be watching and listening on the matter of Washington, D.C., which, as we know, is something close to an unlivably dystopian hellscape, in addition to being a den of vipers and evil. But having said that, I think it wouldn't be a bad idea to depopulate that city. Depopulate it like a nuclear irradiated island in the Pacific. Get the residents out of there. Get the bureaucracies out of there. Make it into a museum city. Make it into an America theme park where people come to look at the pretty buildings and the nice history. Let the president live in the White House. Let the Congress meet on Capitol Hill. But everything beyond that, every single agency and bureaucracy, I say downsize the shit out of it, scatter the pieces to the 4 winds, and send whatever is left over to freaking Omaha and Great Falls. What say you?
I don't know. I got to admit that drawn and quartered aspect of the federal government does ring true. I say we can do away with 90% of it and not miss it. Let's say you got rid of the Department of Education and let the states take on the responsibility of educating the children. What do you lose? An entire bureaucracy, billions of dollars, just not used.
And Swiss brings up a salient point. It was never supposed to be a residential place where lots of people live. That was kind of just something. It was supposed to be something more along the lines of what they have in Brasilia, where it basically is nobody actually lives there. It's just where all the business of the federal government is done. So everybody just who has business there drives in the day and drives out at night. Nobody actually stays the night there.
Right. Okay, so you get rid of the Department of Education. We take out the ATF. We could keep one aspect, one of the Janus faces, the many Janus faces of Homeland Security. Pick one, go with it, keep it. We could completely either keep Homeland Security or the FBI. To me, this seems like redundancy. We could either keep border security or the FBI. Take your pick. I mean, we don't need duplicity and duplication in every aspect of the government. When you have 50 state-run agencies whose job it is to make the citizens' life harder every single day, and yet you turn around and make the same number of identical federal agencies, and then these federal agencies poach talent from the state agencies as well as from the agencies below them.
And the creation of the Homeland Security Department was the stupidest thing, because the justification was that we had to do that to prevent another 9/11. But here's a news flash. There was no breakdown of airport security on 9/11. I know we've talked about this before. Everything those hijackers took on those planes, they were allowed to have. The problem was that the rules were stupid, not that the airport security people didn't apply them correctly. So that was a classic case of we've got a great excuse to just massively expand the government and make untold amounts of brand new bureaucracy that'll exist forever. So what say we do it? And of course they did it.
Immediately. In huge fashion. And by like what is it Amidala says? This is how liberty dies, to glorious applause. Yeah, that's exactly how it dies. Largely through a non-wasted crisis.
Oh yeah, and do you remember all the news coverage shortly after 9/11 where they were walking around asking people on the street, do you think we should trade liberty for security? And all these traumatized people right in the aftermath of the thing that will say, well, yeah, they wouldn't have said that last week, they won't say it next week, but those fake news bastards wanted to get out there on that street and get all these people saying that they want their own oppression and they want to give their own rights away.
And almost every single one of those interviews took place in a major city in the shadow of some great building.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't want that to happen in my city. So yeah, I think they should prevent that from happening. Even when I first heard the name Homeland Security, I thought that's the most Orwellian thing I've ever heard.
It really is. I mean, the concept behind it is absolutely bonkers. The idea that, okay, so we're not allowed to surveil Americans with the FBI or the CIA. We can't do none of that. So instead, we're going to create a brand new department, and that's their only purpose.
Yep.
Okay.
And that is where you get the law that was exploited by the Hillary Clinton campaign to spy on the Trump campaign in 2016. That all goes back to the creation of that department. And look how wrongly that was used against what its purpose was supposed to be. And like everything else that is supposedly starts out with a noble purpose, it just gets used for evil. Dr. Cook, Dr. Peary. So what are your views on who was the actual conqueror of the North Pole?
North Pole or South Pole?
North Pole, since there's still a controversy about that one. Because Cook said he did it first. Cook came back in 1908 and said, I've been there. It's all settled. I did it. Hooray for me. And then when the folks at the Geographic Society examined his logbooks, they said, you can't. Yeah, you didn't mush that many miles in one day, dude. We're not buying this. You didn't pull this off. And so there are some people who still buy Cook's claim. Many people don't. And then a few years later, you get Cook was the first one, and then Peary comes back and says, I got to the damn North Pole too. Now it's settled, and hooray for me. I'm in the history books. And then a different version of the same thing happens. It turns out it's discovered almost, I think, 70 years later that he had actually hidden and planned on destroying a bunch of his notes that showed him basically cooking the books on his listings for the number of miles he was doing each day. And so
right.
So there's a lot of people who don't believe the actual first on foot conquest of the North Pole happened until 1968, believe it or not. And Amundsen, conqueror of the South Pole, he might also be the first man to get the North Pole, because if Cook and Peary were both lying and both didn't make it, then it was Amundsen aboard the Italian airship. There he is, the Italian airship, being piloted by Umberto Nobile, that they overflew the North Pole in 1925, and that was the first. No doubt, people have been there. It's verified. There's no uncertainty about it. So,
can you tell me that was not the most Chad mad lad of the era? I've got this idea, folks. Listen to what I'm going to do. I'm going to get in a balloon, right? I'm going to the North Pole. All right, Tony, you have a good day, and don't forget to eat your lunch.
Oh, dude, do you want to talk about a Chad move? Let's talk about his conquest of the South Pole in
that was hardcore
in 1912, because here's the thing. He was supposed to be going to the North Pole. Nobody knew he was gonna. Everybody thought that Scott was going to the South Pole, and Scott is gonna try and pretty much everybody in the world agreed that the South Pole was a British enterprise, that it had been British expeditions that had got the closest, and thus, by some bullshit chivalric turn of rhetoric, that it should be their right to have the South Pole reserved for their attempts. And Amundsen says, well, fuck that. I think I can beat Scott, and I want to go beat his ass. But he has to lie to everybody about what his true intentions are. Because if he says, I want to go to the South Pole and beat Scott's ass, then he can't get any of his money or his support. So he has to tell everybody, I'm going for the North Pole. And so he doesn't even tell the guys he's going with, the 16, 17 other men that he's traveling with, although his couple of closest friends and associates, by the time they leave, those guys have pretty much put two and two together. They can tell that, it doesn't really look like we're equipping ourselves for the North Pole here. It looks a lot more like we might be going to the South Pole. But he still never told them a damn thing until they were on the ship and had weighed anchor. And so then when he conquers the South Pole and gets back to New Zealand and is able to get the word out, nobody really celebrates his achievement, because they say, South Pole, you were supposed to be going to the other pole. Why the hell did you go down there? Nobody even knew he had gone down there until he had gotten back and already accomplished the achievement, which is that's how fast word travels in the second decade of the 20th century.
That kind of reminds me of a phrase from von Braun, that whole line about he the test went flawlessly but landed on the wrong
planet.
Yeah, he had no intention of shooting at people. He was shooting for the stars, baby. You got to love that.
Yeah. So and then
let me ask you this.
Okay.
Who was the guy that took the diving bell with him? The diving suit?
That would be the Franklin expedition, Northwest Passage, 1845.
Right. Whoa, those dudes are slap nuts. Didn't they end up having to hike 300 miles back to a riverhead that they could send a letter?
Well, they all perished, so no one's really sure what happened with that one.
Oh,
Yeah, that was they just found the ships in the last decade, and Sir John Franklin's grave is still out there somewhere. That's the one big daddy they've still got to find. That's still out there to be discovered somewhere.
and it should be covered by a cairn of some kind, right?
Yeah.
Because he wasn't the last to die.
No, because in the second message that was left by his subordinates, by Crozier and shit. I'm drawing a blank on the other guy's name, but the guys who were in command now, they left a first message in a cairn. Everything's good. We're just waiting to be freed from the ice, And then a year later, they came back and things are much bleaker now. We've lost 15 officers and 9 men. Sir John Franklin died on June whatever of last year, and we're probably going to abandon the ships and start trying to march south. And nobody really knows what happened to him after that, except that some evidence of a couple of campsites was found, and some evidence of cannibalism, and all the lovely things that people do when they're starving.
Absolutely. There, I don't remember these tales so much as from dates and moments in history. I know that this group eventually built themselves a small shack on a stone beach somewhere where they had access to a little bit of fresh water, and for like 5 months one winter, a polar bear posted up outside and just waited patiently for these assholes to come outside and ate them. It was like, ooh, they're soft and squishy. I'm gonna sit here and eat them.
Yeah, when you're a polar bear, you got to take whatever food sources you can get, even if you got to wait for it.
Especially if they're willing to come up there and hide in such flimsy structures. I mean, yeah. Absolutely.
They're thought to be so vicious, but really they're just pragmatists. When your food sources are few and far between, I mean, you don't really have much of a choice. If you see a living thing, you kind of have to try to kill it.
Yeah, it's like, ooh, it moved. I'm gonna eat it. Why? Because there's nothing else. It's rock and snow. What else am I supposed to eat?
But back to the point I was making before, in Amundsen, the Chad of all Chads, you might have in one man, if he was actually the first to the North Pole. It's possible that the same dude conquered both poles and the Northwest Passage, which I'm sorry, that makes you history's greatest badass right there. Just period.
You win. I got to give you that one. You definitely freaking win. And if that's, nobody's saying he didn't go to the North Pole, and nobody's saying he didn't go to the South Pole.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. None of his data are in question at all.
Right. But everyone else's data is kind of up in the air to some extent or another. This is the first verified, bona fide, actually for actual sure, full on records and everything. We got the receipts.
Yeah. And we know that, and a lot of that goes back to the fact that the South Pole, at least, is over terra firma, but the North Pole is just, sea ice floating on an ocean. So it's a much more complicated matter of figuring out when you're exactly over the North Pole than it is when you're exactly over the South Pole. Because when you're standing on the North Pole, you might be moving a mile and a half, 2 miles a day, just standing in one spot.
Right. And it is hard to dead reckon some stuff like that, dude. I come from a totally different environment, but
that's not for you, I hope.
We'll see. And in a swamp, in a canoe, you kind of have a similar problem about that drifting situation, right? There's every chance that every time you try to take some form of dead reckoning or figure out where you're at, that you've moved enough to significantly change your readings.
Right. Yeah. So the North Pole is, over 100 years later, it's still very much an open question, depending on who you ask. The South Pole, It's not. We know Amundsen got there and we know Scott and his men got there exactly 5 weeks later and perished on their way out because their bodies and their journals and letters were all located. So, and then poor Amundsen, he walks out of there having completed this great achievement, but everybody winds up pissed off at him. Because first of all, well, you lied to us all. You didn't go where you said you were going, and we gave you money for an expedition you didn't even go on. So what the fuck? We feel kind of cheated here. And then the other aspect of it was, well, you got out of there alive, and poor brave noble Scott, he froze to death. So how do you feel now, you bastard? So
vindicated. Thank you.
Yeah, and combine that with the fact that he was born without a personality and just never had anything interesting to say, and you've got history's greatest badass who hasn't even received hardly a fraction of the credit that he really ought to enjoy for the totality of his achievements, which are breathtaking.
Yeah, no, I mean, he was definitely the man. All right, Ver, I can tell you're very passionate on this subject, but I think it's time to go to the next video. What do you think?
Go for it.
All right, bud. I've got a little bit to say before we get to the last one on the list. Now, this one, I'm not sure if I got the right footage or not.
That's the right battle.
Okay. All right. Yours is translated. What you said was translated into English, and I've picked up a Russian version of it.
Yeah, it's the little tail end of the Aleutian archipelago. Right. Those last couple islands are actually Russian territory. So they're called the Komandorski Islands in Russian, but the Commander Islands in English.
Right. Well, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we're dealing with essentially what would have been a similar Pacific campaign to Guadalcanal and the Marianas Islands and all of that stuff, Midway, all of that whole thing, except up here, it's cold weather gear.
Yeah, and the fascinating thing about that battle is that is the very last time in world history that two fleets of capital ships engaged in an artillery duel in a battle that there were no airplanes or submarines present.
Right. And the submarines had merely been relegated to the lower Pacific theater. They were not operating that far north. I don't think they were north of Hawaii at this point at all.
Yeah, and especially not since the Japanese were in possession of Attu and Kiska Islands, so they were the only ones who could operate submarines out of the Aleutians at that point.
But they didn't have any, was the thing. They just weren't there. So that's completely out, and the lack of air power shows through very clearly on the fact that the ships more or less kind of, for a little while there, seem to just stick and move at a distance. They don't really come in on each other hard right out the gate. They're both dodging ice flows and icebergs and.
Well, yeah, and when you get into World War II, the guns on the battleships and cruisers are so big at that point that the closest you can engage somebody is 10,000 yards. If you try to engage closer than that, you're just going to shoot over them because your guns are so huge and shoot so far. And so the optimal range to engage during this period is about 16, 17, 20,000 yards is the range at which you're going to have the best success. And even good success means about, a 10 or 12% hit rate on an outstanding day.
1 or 2 shells per volley, if that, or more like 1 or 2 shells per 6 volleys. Because, I mean, you're talking a hang time for those shells of like 9 seconds.
And I think that's something a lot of people don't appreciate when they think about naval combat, is how few of the shots actually connect.
Well, I mean, think about it. The chances of it actually hitting you are fairly astronomical. It takes a really good gunner to actually put shot on target. You're much more likely to hit the ocean.
Yeah, I was actually reading out the artillery order of battle for this engagement. I'm going to try and find it again.
You remember the old Battleship game? I've
Yeah.
always felt that it was kind of it was broken to start with because no battle ever takes place without maneuverability. And so I've always wanted to adjust the game to include movement of the ships because there's no rule that says a ship can't move into an area that you've already struck. Right?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Battleship doesn't really cover it if you get what I'm saying. Like the difficulty is much, much higher. It's like you have to pull all the plugs out at the end of every round and try again blind. So
Yeah, can I read out this order of battle?
do the thing.
Yeah. All right, so 0600. The United States ships were formed in a scouting line at 6-mile intervals, zigzagging at 15 knots on a base course 020 degrees. 0700. While the Japanese formation was turning 180 degrees to a northern course, destroyer Inazuma, still heading south, spotted unknown ships 27,000 yards to port. A navigating officer on one of the transports visually observed the American force minutes later. 0715. The ships were identified as American as the day dawned. 0730. Hosagaya ordered a turn to starboard to the southeast, while the two fast transports were ordered to withdraw north-northwest, escorted by Inazuma. 0730. Lead ships Coghlan and Richmond, the U.S. ships, made radar contact with the two trailing Japanese transports and a destroyer on course 080 at 13 knots. 0740. The Americans changed course to 080 and the rear ships increased speed to operate as a compact group. 5 radar contacts were counted. 0755. The Japanese turned northward to course 340 and the Americans came to course 000 to follow. 0811. The Americans visually identified the radar contacts as 2 transports, 2 light cruisers, and a destroyer. 0820. The Americans sighted the masts of 4 more Japanese ships on the horizon. 0835. The Americans identified the mast as 2 heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers and turned to course 240. 0838. The Japanese transport swerved off to the northwest. 0839. The Americans increased speed to 25 knots. 0840. Nachi opened fire on Richmond at a range of 20,000 yards. See, there's the optimal range. The second and third salvos were straddles. 0840. Nachi launched her spotter aircraft to direct fire on the U.S. force, and that is the only airplane in this entire battle, is the spotter aircraft from that light cruiser. 0841. Richmond opened fire on Nachi. The third salvo was a straddle. 0842. Salt Lake City opened fire on Nachi at a range of 21,000 yards. The second salvo was a straddle. As the range closed, Bailey opened fire on Nachi at a range of 14,000 yards and then switched to a light cruiser. Coghlan opened fire on Nachi at a range of 18,000 yards. 0845. Nachi launched 8 torpedoes, all missed. 0850. One of Richmond's 6-inch shells hit the starboard side of Nachi's signal bridge, killing 11, wounding 21. Another shell hit Nachi's mainmast and severed the flagship's radio communication. 0852. One of Richmond's 6-inch shells hit Nachi's torpedo compartment. Another of Richmond's 6-inch shells hit Nachi's control rooms, killing 2 and wounding 5. Nachi dropped back after losing electrical power to ammunition hoists and gun mounts. 0903. Richmond ceases firing. Salt Lake City continues firing from its stern turrets. 0910. Salt Lake City is hit by an 8-inch project fired by Maya. 2 men are killed while the starboard observation plane caught fire and was jettisoned overboard. 1010. Salt Lake City was hit by an 8-inch projectile fired by Maya. 1059. Salt Lake City hit by an 8-inch projectile fired by Maya. 1103. Salt Lake City hit by an 8-inch projectile fired by Maya. Salt Lake City transfers water to correct a list caused by flooding. 1152. Salt Lake City hit by yet another 8-inch projectile fired by Maya. 1153. Saltwater enters a fuel tank in use and extinguishes Salt Lake City's boiler fires. 1154. Salt Lake City slows to a stop. Bailey, Coghlan, and Monahan approached the Japanese cruisers for a torpedo attack, while Richmond and Dale made smoke to shield Salt Lake City. 1203. Salt Lake City restarted boilers and increased speed to 15 knots. 1213. Salt Lake City increases speed to 22 knots. 1225. Bailey launched 5 torpedoes at 9,500 yards, all missed. Bailey was hit twice by 8-inch shells and came to a stop with 5 dead. Coghlan was hit once. 1230. Japanese ships retire westward. Neither Coghlan nor Monahan launched torpedoes. And there's your battle. And it's all over, and it's all over by lunchtime.
Slam.
And here you have yet another case of an Imperial Japanese Navy commanding officer who has his opponent on the verge of defeat and decides to withdraw.
I never have understood that.
Yeah, it's.
I mean,
it happens throughout this war, and you never can figure out why.
If Tojo had followed through on Pearl Harbor, they could have took Hawaii in 3 hours. It would have been a nasty fight, but they had the numbers, the willpower, and the rested men to do it. They just didn't. That would have been a whole nother war if we'd have lost Hawaii right there.
And it happens most disastrously at Leyte Gulf, when the main Japanese battle fleet with the history's biggest battleship and heavy cruisers and light cruisers, and all we have to throw against them is some little escort carriers and a few destroyers and a few destroyer escorts, and all they had to do was press the issue and continue destroying us, and our invading force is totally exposed and can be shot to bits, and they get right on the edge of victory, and then the admiral says, we're out of here, bye, see ya.
And that happens also from their perspective of the island hopping campaign that's happening backwards from their perspective. They never do dedicate enough shot to supporting their ground troops on those islands. They do the morning barrage and then the evening barrage, and they just do the constant, the door prize version of making war.
And that all arises from the seething hatred that the Army and the Navy feel toward one another, and
exactly, which is beautiful.
The trenchant desire for the one never to want to help the other out at all. I mean, the Japanese Army and Navy had a more antagonistic relationship with each other than their country did with the enemy.
Yeah, for real. Like, they duplicated all of their intel organizations in the Navy and their Army. Had completely separate chains of command for intel. And so it was quite often that the Navy was out doing maneuvers that the Army had no freaking clue about. And then the Army would be calling for support on cruisers that are nowhere near their location. Yep. Because nobody communicated. They hated each other so which, brings us to a very interesting, and I might want to take an entire show to apply to this one. There was one division that was a mix of Army, Navy, the Imperial Guard folks, and a handful of other organizations that were all folded into one unit. Do you know what unit I'm talking about?
I do not.
Unit 731. Are you familiar with any of this?
No, keep talking. I'll look it up.
Let's not make a run at it now. We can take 45 minutes on that one and not even scratch the surface. And at halfway through, we can put on our tinfoil hats with it. It's a good one. We'll cover it next week or the week.
Oh, yeah. I know the Ishii unit. I got it. I know what you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah, I just didn't recognize the number was all.
This is the Shackleton journey. And how are we
speaking of badassery?
Right.
Now, the whole overarching topic of the heroic age of Arctic and Antarctic exploration, it's one of those favorite slices of history that you always return to throughout your life. Even when you don't necessarily have anything more to learn, but just because you love it so much. And that's what that period of history is like for me, and it's probably been that way ever since I think I read Endurance by Alfred Lansing, which is the authoritative treatment of the Shackleton Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition of 1914-17. I read that when I was about 13, and I've probably read it. God, I bet I've read that book more than I've read any other book. But yeah, and that gets you all down the whole rabbit hole of Scott and Amundsen, but it's funny how long it takes to write history and how many drafts there are.
Right.
Because
write it.
Yeah, because like in the in the couple of few decades after the South Pole was conquered. So, let's say post World War One and into the post World War One to post World War Two. Let's just say that for the first set of years, the reputations of those men was all completely different than it is now. Scott had the best reputation because he was thought to have perished like a noble English gentleman. Amundsen, even though he was the man who achieved all the great feats, he was really held in contempt by a lot of people because he had lied about his intentions.
He's a liar and a fraud.
Yeah, and he had
eaten the money. Then why wouldn't you lie about what you did?
And he had eaten his dogs, and people didn't think that was very nice, even though that was part of the plan the whole time. And
so
also,
on that. Hold on, I got an opinion on eating dogs. If you put me in a position where I have a choice between eating my dog and eating my neighbor, the neighbor needs to watch out because that dog can help me find more neighbors.
Oh yeah, and the journals of the men on both the Scott expedition and the Shackleton expedition on the day when it was decided that we got to put down some of the dogs, or else, because that day arrives when you got to put down some of the dogs, and the men were just absolutely anguished by it. And there were so many versions of that same thing you just said, that there are so many men in this party I would have rather shot than this dog I had to shoot.
Right. I mean, look at that asshole over there. He's not doing nothing but sitting there breathing and looking at me real mean. We can just cap him.
Yeah.
That'll feed the dogs and us. We'll be good for a week, dude.
And like this, I just had to shoot a dog that had better human qualities than most of the humans I know on this journey.
Yeah, that's got to be depressing in every case. So I mean, it pretty much goes horrendously wrong the whole way through, doesn't it? I mean,
the endurance expedition, yes, it is really that thing goes tits up right from the get go, and it's really two expeditions
even before, because he was one of the first ships to use tinned meat, and the tinned meat that was tinned for him, you're
thinking of Franklin again.
Oh my God, I just cannot keep these straight in my head.
That's all right.
That's going to happen a lot with this topic.
But yeah, that's one of the theories that has arisen about the Franklin expedition since probably since the 80s, since the graves of his three men on Beachy Island were exhumed and forensic examinations performed on them. That right. It's the theory started gaining currency that their tinned food they had brought along, which was a brand new technical innovation. The whole idea of putting food in cans and tins and soldering them shut. That it right. It had been done too cheaply and too quickly and too badly, and there was just lead solder on the inside of these cans that was just glooped in there and
yeah,
soaking into the food for however many years.
It was bad. Plus, half the cans weren't properly sealed, and so during the soldering process, contaminants were introduced, and so they had burst. Some of the cans burst under the pressure of freezing. It was bad,
and
bad.
Many of them wound up being not usable at all.
But they were excellent bear bait.
Yeah, and when you're on a 2 year long voyage in the far north of Canada, where you're only seeing one living thing per week, any threat to your food supply is a pretty big goddamn deal.
It is a biblical epic issue. You have to deal with that immediately, post haste, and up front, and then probably eat your neighbor.
But Shackleton, and I was just talking about the evolving reputations of the respective explorers. So at first, Scott is seen as the noble hero, even though he didn't win the race, and Amundsen is seen, as sort of an underhanded schemer who doesn't have strong enough feelings about these things. And Shackleton he really isn't seen as much of anything at that point, except, you know, a guy who improbably managed to get all of his men back from his disastrously failed expedition of 1914-17. He certainly doesn't come back to acclaim and glory and riches because
I don't know. I don't know though, because in some circles he did. The captains of other expeditions that went north all almost revered him because he did bring his men back.
Yeah, but in the immediate aftermath of getting back, it was
it wasn't pretty.
It was they had the misfortune of making their return to civilization right as the First World War was in its most gruesomely awful nadir at that point, and really nobody even wanted to pay him a second thought at that point. You know, we're glad you got your 27 men out alive, you know, but we had 70,000 men get slaughtered at the Somme last week, so let's try and keep things in perspective here.
Oh, good on you, mate. But should we crack on then? The Huns are taking over the Reichstag.
Mm-hmm. So it took probably, the Alfred Lansing book comes out in 1957-58, I think, and then as people read that book over the course of the next 20 or 30 years, which is right when I first read it, and then Shackleton starts increasing in reputation compared to the other two guys, and it starts being seen as less important that, you know, technically he never had a successful expedition, never achieved the feat he was trying to achieve, but just the track record that he built of problem solving and leadership and keeping men alive and getting to places he shouldn't have been able to get to. The totality of that legacy was such that people slowly started to realize that, you know, maybe this guy is the real badass here and not the other two guys that we thought were the badasses. And that's kind of still pretty much where it is today.
Right. Well, I mean, you got to admit these people were far more manly than the men we have today.
Yes. And I think something went out of our species when we no longer had frontiers to conquer on this planet. I think something really important went out of the human character. Some kind of spark died. I'm not sure exactly how to describe it, but
you're familiar with the antediluvian hypothesis?
No.
So we know that 14 to 12,000 years ago, there was a major climactic event that affected at least vasty sections of North America, the Northern Hemisphere. Well, I'm not 100% certain what it did to the Southern Hemisphere, but the concept is that previous to the fall of the last ice age, there was a previous human civilization that had arisen. And the previous interglacial was like 9,000 years long or something like that. So there's plenty of time for a civilization to have developed to our level of development and then collapse and completely be erased by the next ice age.
Yeah, it's not impossible. Archaeologists always want to think they know everything, but they never do.
Right. We'll have to sit down and I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll mix some Unit 731 with some OO parts and we'll do next week. You know what an OO part is?
Kinky.
Yeah. OO parts are out of place objects, things that are artifactual in nature and found in locations they have no business being. Most of them are BS, just so you know.
Well, yeah, and you can make a convincing sounding video out of any dubious claim, really, and that's
considered.
Yeah, and that's why dumb conspiracy theories have such lives of their own, and it's impossible to kill them.
So, how many can you go off the top of your head? I can tell you one: clouds are projections onto the dome. There is a dome. The Earth is flat. Burbs don't reel. We've got the reptilian alien concept going on.
Moon landing hoax.
Right. Oh yeah, the moon landing. See, there's so many. You could just go so far with this concept.
Oh, do we have another video from this guy?
Yeah, no, I like Simon Webb. He seems to be a fairly level-headed gentleman.
Yeah, let's listen to him.
All right. So the general premise here is the mad obsession with renewable energy, organic food, and generally turning back the clock to pre-industrial age. These 15-minute cities and everything are trying to remove the necessity of the car so that you don't want to have one.
Right.
They want to remove the necessity of the internal combustion engine so that you don't want to have one. But it's all seems very, very well and good. It seems logical, and why would you need one if you don't need one? So you wouldn't have one. Except I really like my 69 El Camino with 396 and a ratchet shifter in the floorboard. No, I don't drag race, but I could if I wanted to. Right?
Right.
And that's my choice. And they're taking away choices by making it unnecessary and determining that you don't need it because it's not necessary. But
and you
anyway,
can't, and besides, you can't do it because you'll destroy the planet. You will destroy the planet unless you vote for people we like and do the things we want you to.
And otherwise, it's a thought crime, and we'll have you in a concentration camp where Captain Curmudgeon gets to be my big spoon. I'm going to keep him a spot warm. We got to save room for my buddy Flow State because we're all going to be there together.
My boxcar is your boxcar.
All right, bud. As long as we get to share the same gas, it'll be all right, I suppose. Might a little too far. I'm sorry, dude.
Hello again.
Hi.
Of all the frauds and deceptions practiced upon the public in recent years, none has obtained greater respectability or more widespread acceptance than the natural food swindle. It has even been accorded the ultimate accolade of royal patronage, King Charles being a vociferous champion of the cause. Put simply, the basic tenet of the creed is this: natural means wholesome and good. Artificial means dangerous, toxic, and probably carcinogenic. This simple idea is applied not only to food, but to every aspect of modern life, from the generation of electricity to the construction of buildings. A key word when discussing natural food is organic, as in organic farming or organic vegetables. The mere use of this adjective confers an air of sanctity upon any substance or activity, be it ever so humble. So we find shops offering for sale organic carrots.
Okay, so I was in the shopping center the other day, and I went through picking up my potatoes for my pot roast and whatnot, and I came across a label on some little potatoes, and I was like, why is that there? It said they were organic, and I was like, well, of course they're organic. They're potatoes. How could a potato not be organic? I mean, is this like putting the hot label on the coffee? I don't understand.
Yeah, that word organic really has come to mean 1,000 different things to 1,000 different people, hasn't it?
Right? And all natural. This is another one that really bothers me.
Yep.
When something is all natural, and then you look at the label and it's got all kind of like craziness in it, or just at the very least sugar, a pound of sugar added. That's not natural, but the sugar is, I suppose. Okay, radium is natural, right?
Yeah,
Selenium?
and not to mention the fact that artificial fertilizers are the only reason we can grow enough food to support the size of population we have. If we tried to grow everything old school organic the way all these hippy dippy motherfuckers want us to grow everything, we would have a famine that would kill 50% of the people on Earth.
That's the plan. Welcome to the WEF, ladies and gentlemen. Both of your neighbors will be dead. It'll be fine.
Implication being that they are somehow different from and superior to the common or garden variety. The fact that all food is organic seems to escape notice. After all, have you ever heard of an inorganic carrot? The theory so far as it can be explained to non-believers, appears to be as follows. There is something inherently suspect and undesirable about anything made of or produced with the aid of chemicals. That the entire universe, including us and all our carrots, is made of nothing but chemicals is apparently neither here nor there. In the matter of fertilizers, for example, only decomposing plants and animals are acceptable as a source of nitrogen.
All right, so what do you know about the bat guano wars, the bird guano wars? Are you familiar with those?
I know the broad strokes, but not the specifics.
Okay, I want to call attention to a particular event that took place in the Gulf of Mexico somewhere around 1870, 1880, that ballpark, right?
We're talking that was how we wound up in possession of all those dumb little tiny islands out in the Pacific that wound up becoming so important during the Second World War.
Exactly. Okay, so during this time period, there was a island somewhere in the Pacific that is no longer there. And America is blamed for having blown it up because it either belonged to us or it belonged to like Brazil or something, which would have given Brazil a military presence in the Gulf, right?
Right.
So this tiny spit of land that was only good for two things, fishing and bird guano, which we're going into like the Civil War and then, you know, the Spanish-American War, and then we got a few wars fixing to take place, and bird guano became really big money.
Yeah, because it used to be that was the best place you could get nitrates because we didn't have good enough technology for getting it out of rocks, and then then there was a big race to snatch up all of the world's bat guano islands. Right. You know, and then predictably we developed the technology to where we could get nitrate out of the ground, and we didn't need the bat guano anymore. And then you get a weird diplomatic legacy like that.
Yeah, you end up owning strange islands in the middle of the Pacific for no apparent reason
that have nothing on them but animal droppings.
Exactly. Well, and I know that digressed quite a bit from the topic of natural, but that's one of the aspects we're dealing with here. We're dealing with a population that's so huge that any particular change you attempt to make to the main living component on this planet, which apparently is us, according to y'all, it's us. It's not the trees. It's not the grass. It's not the plants. It's not the bugs. Personally, I think it's beetles. But any change we attempt to make to with it is going to have the cobra problem. The law of unforeseen consequences. Yep. Whenever you try to manipulate a huge system, there's always unknown repercussions. Right?
And the more they try to social engineer us by brute force, the more they do not realize or appreciate that very simple, very important concept.
Complicated systems require very delicate touches. And even then, you have people who keep cobras in their basement.
Yep.
So, yeah.
And if you try to socially engineer a population because you're trying to eliminate this bad thing over here, you're going to create a dozen more bad things that never even occurred to you that you were going to create.
Exactamundo.
Growing crops. Fertilizer produced in a factory contains chemicals and is artificially prepared. It is consequently the work of the devil. Now, the fact of the matter is, of course, that one atom of nitrogen is utterly indistinguishable from another. Whether that atom comes from rotting potato peelings or from a white plastic sack labelled factory-produced fertilizer has no bearing whatever on the matter. The electrons, neutrons and protons that comprise a nitrogen atom are all identical and interchangeable. The only difference between the two atoms is that one comes from a natural source and the other has been made artificially from chemicals. We come here to the crux of the whole belief system. It is taken as given that anything natural is by definition good for us. This unspoken assumption has taken root so firmly in our society that even the most rational of us can find ourselves falling victim to it. In an unguarded moment last week, I bought a carton of orange juice whose label announced 100% natural, nothing artificial added. Not unnaturally, I assumed that I was buying pure orange juice. In fact, when I got it home, I found it had been sweetened with as much sugar as the stickiest of soft drinks.
Now, tell me, is that false advertising or is that just advertising?
It's just advertising because you're just saying a word and trusting the consumer to think what you want him to think about that word.
All right. You're talking to somebody who will sit down and drink like straight grapefruit juice. I'm not an overly sugary kind of person. I'm not a big fan of donuts. I don't mind natural orange juice. I'll squeeze my own oranges given half a chance.
But yeah, the problem obviously is people conflating the word natural with the word healthy, thinking
Right.
they are synonyms, which they are not, because all natural, no artificial ingredients absolutely can mean a carton of orange juice with a fucking pound of sugar in it.
Apparently. Also, arsenic is natural and is found in every single peach pit out there. So, apple seeds.
There's all manner of natural things that you're better off not consuming.
Cyanide. These things are natural and they're absolutely the antithesis of life. You can't continue functioning with it, and yet they were also
let's say you're buying a box of rat poison. Do you like a brand of rat poison better if it says it's got all natural ingredients?
Right? No, you're totally accurate on that one. Yeah. I mean, consider the all natural snake oils of the previous century. These freaking patent medicines that were basically just cocaine and morphine.
Yeah. Opium and cocaine are natural. Hey, like I said,
it's natural. Yep. All it takes is a little gasoline and some astringent, and maybe some baking soda. I don't know the recipe. I'm just saying.
and it makes you feel really good. Just try some.
Swiss Miss has a point. Snake venom is natural. I don't see you over there sucking it down.
I guarantee your ailments won't be bothering you as much after you take a big mouthful of opium and cocaine.
Yeah. In fact, neither will your family life or your gambling debts.
Yep.
None of that will bother you at all.
Would you like the big bottle or the huge bottle?
Yeah, they don't come in small.
Well, the label told no more than the literal truth. Sugar is natural. It might rot your teeth and contribute to a host of diseases, but at least it isn't artificial. I suppose I could mix up a solution of orange juice, uranium and cyanide and then market it as a new orange drink. 100%
He's an absolute troll, dude. He can't help it. I think his router was installed under a bridge. This man regularly calls out the people that are over here trying to troll on him and sends people to their channel to go see whether or not they agree. He's never negative. He's never aggressive. He doesn't send people to go mess with him and says, do not comment to him. Simply go watch.
He just said practically the exact same thing you said. That was great.
It's a beautiful thing, dude. I mean, like radium, people used to use radium on watch dials, and that shit is so toxic that a place that finds a radioactive signature, a landfill that catches a radioactive signature will turn away that entire truckload of material.
How many decades did it take medical science to figure out that X-rays were harmful?
Like 2.
Yeah, it took almost half a century.
Yeah, to start drawing the conclusion that, wait a second, these things that we can't see seem to have an effect on the people around them. And the first clue to that was partly Madame Curie herself.
In the 1950s, there was an X-ray machine in practically every children's shoe store in the entire country.
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct.
Because it was presented as, look at this great technological advancement. You can look directly into your shoe and see how well your foot fits inside the shoe, and isn't that great? And it's only decades later that it occurs to everyone, God, we were irradiating all of our kids, weren't we? For no apparent good reason. That was a dumb thing to do, wasn't it?
Okay, so I got another question for you when it comes to the question of radiation. We dropped what, 14, 18 nukes in Utah and New Mexico? Like, we straight glassed vast sections of the desert out there. And to this day, we have magnificent sunsets because of it. So here's my question. How much of that fallout made it into the stratosphere to be dropped on the East Coast and maybe Britain and maybe Europe?
Yeah, and even still, when we were doing that, we didn't know a whole hell of a lot about fallout.
Do you remember the drills they used to give the soldiers to lay down flat, cover their head after the bomb goes off, stand up and face the bomb?
Yep.
Put on your glasses before you do so. And then you would stand for the given amount of time until right before the blast wave came, and you flop down on the ground and let the blast wave go over, and then stand back up and watch the bomb. Dear Lord.
That all did a lot of good.
I'm sure their teeth were never whiter. All natural, folks. Just saying. It is not unnatural. It is merely unusual.
And even still, you know, it was throughout the 50s and the 60s, even into the 70s, I think they were still doing above ground detonations in the Nevada range, and people in Vegas were used to come and watch the bomb blast from their hotel room. It was part of the Vegas tourism pitch. Come and sit on your room balcony and watch the fucking nuclear test shot.
And I want to repeat a previous statement. Their teeth have never been whiter.
Their teeth have never been whiter.
Right? These vegetables are 30 pounds heavier. We don't know why. Oh, Lord.
Nothing artificial added. The point is that the natural world is full of things that are unhealthy for us, and in many cases downright poisonous. Not a few of these substances have an alarming habit of finding their way into the food chain. For myself, I regard salmonella as the most natural and organic thing in the world, yet I have not the least desire to ingest it at the breakfast table. Indeed, I require the food industry to spare no pains in removing anything harmful from the food I eat and then preserving it from contamination in the most efficient way possible. Yet, even in this field, the natural food lobby is at work. I think some older viewers might remember the fuss about irradiated food in the 1980s. One of the best ways of destroying harmful bacteria and preserving food is using irradiation. The only problem is that not only does irradiation sound horribly artificial, the very word reminds one of radiation with all the attendant negative images. Hiroshima, atomic weapons, nuclear power stations, leukemia.
For this bit, you can look at our intro.
Radiation, they all go hand in hand. Quite clearly, irradiation must be a bad thing. It's useless to explain that irradiation is simply a way of killing germs and it doesn't make food radioactive. So it was that an exceedingly useful way of making food safe had to be abandoned because of the idiocy of some people. There is a great irony here, one that provides us with a strong clue as to the real subconscious motivation behind the natural, organic and back to nature movement. It is this. Compelling evidence exists that two of the oldest and most familiar methods of preserving food in use today, that is to say pickling and smoking, create carcinogens which permeate the treated food. In other words, there is good reason to think that kippers and pickled onions help cause cancer.
All right. So it's rare nowadays that you find home-aged, home-smoked, home-cooked smoked meats. These things rarely exist in the American diet. And yet I saw across.
And they were once ubiquitous too.
Right? Yeah, no, used to, you had, tell every household had a smokehouse. Every household had a dry age cellar.
Yep. Because that was how you made your food supply last all year.
Exactly. You'd hang up 30 hocks of hams, you'd hang up 2 sides of beef, you'd hang up, what I'm getting at is I found a small pizzeria on an island over here off the coast. And it's like one of these crappy chain joints that's like Four Christians Pizza, or Four Brothers Pizza, or Hunt's Pizza, or whatever the nearby crappy gas station pizza joint is, right? Except this is that franchise, except these people acquire all of their meats locally. So we went in there to get to a menu that would blow your mind for like a Hunt's Brothers or whatever. And when we ordered, we were like, well, shoot, if they've got this huge of a menu, let's at least check out what they do. And we ordered a pizza, and it was all hand smoked and handmade salamis and smoked steak. And oh man, it was amazing. We immediately, as soon as we got home and we ate like that medium pizza we had gotten, we turned right back around, went up and got our supper for that night from the same place. Excellent meats. And that's the kind of stuff that doesn't happen when you're dealing with national chains.
Correct.
And all of that stuff is just as horrible and bad as they say. It's all really, really bad for you. But God, it's so good. And none of it's bad for you in moderation. It's just when you're an American and your response to finding something tasty is to go back and get 4 more.
It is if the motivations of those who oppose the introduction of irradiated food were logical, then we might expect to have seen a campaign to keep kippers off the shelves of the local supermarket. We've seen nothing of the sort, and for one simple reason: pickled onions and kippers have been around for a long while. They are produced with simple technology using familiar things like vinegar and wood smoke. We feel comfortable about them for the same reason that many people feel happier about putting horse manure on their allotments than they would about using nitrates. At the heart of it all lies a mistrust of science, technology, and the modern world in general. It is the same mentality that impels otherwise reasonable people to advocate demolishing nuclear power stations and replacing them with windmills. It can be summed up as old ways are good, new ways are bad. If we're building, then wood and stone are good.
Now, correct me. I'll say, boy, correct me if I'm wrong. But isn't that a conservative? I say a conservative outlook.
You mean far right?
Yeah. All of a sudden, all these hippy dippy Democrats sound like conservative, rational people. How'd that happen?
Must be an accident.
It's got to be some kind of misunderstanding. There's no way we can agree on a particular point. There's no way, right? Okay, well, it is the degradation of Western civilization.
It is indeed.
Good materials to use. Brick is just about acceptable, but concrete and steel are to be avoided at all costs. It has nothing to do with practicality or convenience. Electricity should be generated only by water wheels and windmills. Farms should, as far as possible, be run without the benefit of 20th century science. The more primitive the agricultural techniques, the better the farm. The ideal farm would presumably be one with no machinery at all, using no artificial materials of any description. It is a simple philosophy, if not particularly rational.
So I had this clan when I was in high school. We had a group of Kamuni pigs. They're these homestead type bred pigs specifically to be browsers instead of grazers, right? We had 4 or 5 of them walk up in the backyard, and I live in a pig farm. Like, I grew up on a pig farm that at the time had no pigs, and I was like, I like pigs. So I go out with a bucket of food, pour it in the old pig trough. I had to empty the pig trough out because it hadn't been used in years. Just put food in the pig trough, and they walked in to go eat it. And I closed the door. We were back in the pig business.
There you go. Bada bing, bada boom.
I trained these pigs to come to the ringing of a bell and to come to the location that the bell was ringing. And so if I wanted to harvest a particular pig, I would go like up on back of a truck with a ramp, and I'd go up on it and ring the bell, and they would all try to come and get on the truck, and I just kick the ones that I didn't want out. You know, I can't come up here. Not you, not you. There you go.
All right,
Close
boys,
the
who
door.
wants it the least?
Right. Anyway, that would be a farm with no machinery, right? That was what I was doing. But I was doing 15 pigs on 200 and some odd acres of swamp, and they was just out there swimming around doing their thing until I rang the bell. There was no fences.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Yeah, it seemed like a good deal to me, man. I didn't have to do nothing. I just trained the pigs.
The pigs that showed up on their own.
Exactly. Doing all the wrong things over here. You see this, right?
I see nothing.
I
see a professional at work.
Absolutely. I don't know why that keeps happening. I'll try this one more time.
King Charles earlier because he epitomizes this type of thinking. His enthusiasm for organic gardening is, of course, well known. His general desire to turn back the clock in other ways can be clearly seen at Poundbury, the housing estate which he was instrumental in developing. Picturesque stone-clad cottages with unnecessary chimneys and tiny windows that barely admit enough daylight. A make-believe marketplace and old-world streetlights. The 20th century might never have happened at Poundbury. You can see this beautiful little confection in the thumbnail to this video.
I like Poundbury, by the way. I'm a Poundbury fan.
The agenda of those who.
I'm pretty much a fan of anything that starts with pound.
You know, I don't think it's the worst idea in the world wanting to build a little town that actually looks nice.
Yeah, no, I get you, but it feels kind of like a Pembroke, a Potemkin thing to me, right?
Yeah, and I understand perfectly well all of the criticisms. I think it was coming from a well-intentioned place, even if the execution was in many ways imperfect.
All right. So the problem I have with it is you're depriving people of the modern era of modernism. How can you have a postmodernism without allowing people to be extant in the modernism scheme? I don't get it. Am I nuts? Am I crazy? I mean, how can you be on both ends of this conversation? How can you be all about progress while also turning the clock back on 800 years of technical development?
I think you can have all of the modern conveniences we enjoy and still have nice looking buildings that harken back to periods of architecture when things actually look nice. I don't think that you have to choose one or the other.
No, I'm not saying that modern buildings have to be ugly, although that does tend to be the progressive bent.
It does seem to be the rule.
It does seem to be the rule, but I don't think you have to, like he said, put in artificial chimneys to make the place look nice when they're just artificial. You're just
well then you're just getting into kitsch, basically.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's what I'm saying. An entire Potemkin concept. Oh my Lord! I've dropped everything. Where did it go? Oh, there it is.
Uh-oh. Technical difficulties.
Technical difficulties, folks. Stop the show. We can't continue here to listen to this guy.
Who advocate organic food, a return to a spurious pre-industrial golden age. Nobody in their senses can doubt for a moment that the food we eat today is more wholesome than that eaten a century ago. It's cleaner, safer, more hygienically packaged, more efficiently preserved and stored than ever before. We have our advanced technological society to thank for this. Perhaps those who do wish to reject all advances in food technology made this century For them, it might be instructive to end by looking at some genuine organic farms. I actually lived and worked on an organic farm for a time, or a place that used organic farming. This was in Turkey in the mid-1970s, at the time when the country was just degenerating into a civil war. I found myself working on an irrigation project in a village up in the mountains in Anatolia, near to the Anatolian plateau. It was a village with no electricity and no piped water. And the idea was that we were digging an irrigation canal to bring water to the village. As in many parts of the world, a lot of the Middle East and South Asia, there were many villages at that time in Turkey having virtually no contact with the industrial world. No tractors, no fertilizers, no pesticides, no modern technology at all. Those communities recycled everything. They were perforce heavily into organic farming. One might have supposed that living such a natural life would bring good health and longevity, but disease was absolutely rife and infant mortality astronomically high. This is because in that village they recycled everything. Instead of dangerous chemical fertilizers, they spread, among other organic matter, feces, both animal and human, upon their fields. There was a huge pile by a hillside where everybody emptied their pots and all the shit built up, and they used to spread all that human excrement on their crops because they couldn't afford fertilizers. A natural and inevitable
The term you're looking for there, bud, is night soil.
I remember this Matt Damon movie where he had to do something like that.
Right. Hey, if they could do it in space, we could do it on Earth, damn it. Why are we trying to go to Mars to terraform Mars when obviously we can't terraform our own planet? Why?
Consequence of this was that the area had endemic cholera, typhoid, dysentery, and hepatitis. I picked up typhoid there and hepatitis. Still,
I can laugh about it now.
Natural and good are not always synonymous.
Good old typhoid and hepatitis.
All right. That's the part that I've got lined up for next week. So now we enter into the here you take the lead banner situation. Which looks
am I taking the lead bantering?
Yeah, just to provide a topic. The video behind that would have been behind us was about the INU, but I really don't want to go into that one. Time.
I'm gonna pump up Shackleton a little more. I want to talk about the voyage of the James
Caird.
Caird.
That off a little more if you like. I don't mind.
Yeah, the for those who don't know, the voyage of the James Caird, the most treacherous, most dangerous, most improbably successful open boat journey in the history of open boat journeys. So the expedition, they were supposed to trek all the way across the Antarctic continent. That didn't happen, obviously. The ship, the Endurance, gets trapped in the pack ice, eventually crushed and sunk. The men, 27 of the men, wind up living on an ice floe and just floating around for several months. The ice floe breaks up. They've still got the lifeboats. They get into the lifeboats. They manage to get the lifeboats 300 miles to Elephant Island, where they can either sit and wait for rescue, which is likely never going to come because nobody's ever set foot on that island, because nobody would ever want to set foot on that island. So it's Shackleton decides we got to take one of these boats.
There.
Huh?
They found a boat there.
Not on Elephant Island.
What's the next one down? The next one they go to?
South Georgia.
They found a weird boat, but go ahead.
We'll talk about this later. The voyage to South Georgia is 800 miles west to east. They've got a little lifeboat that they've managed to build up a little bit. They stick a sail on it, put 6 men in it, and it takes 17 days, I believe it took them in the roughest oceans in the world. 17, 18 days to get to South Georgia. They get to South Georgia, but they're on the wrong side of the damn island. They're only about, as the crow flies, they're only about 15 miles away from where they need to be. The whaling station, Grytviken, on the eastern shore of the island. But it turns out that they're going to have to go on foot and cross an uncharted mountain range and walk for 3 days straight with no mountaineering gear in order to get there. They've got about 90 foot of rope. They screw some framing screws into the soles of their boots for primitive crampons. They've got a carpenter's axe is the only piece of real mountaineering gear they have, which isn't a piece of mountaineering gear. And against all the odds, they fucking make it. They make it to the whaling station, and even though the manager of the station is a guy who's been friends with Shackleton for years, he doesn't recognize him. Shackleton has to introduce himself because he looks that disheveled. This guy says, "Who the hell are you?" He says, "You know me. My name's Shackleton." And then the manager says, "Whoa, you look like shit, dude."
Right.
So now he's got to go rescue the 3 guys he left on the western shore of South Georgia, and then he's got to go to Chile, to the south end of Chile, and arrange some kind of a boat to go and get the 22 men that he's still got at Elephant Island. It winds up taking him about 4 months and several attempts. He gets turned back 3 times by the pack ice. On the 4th attempt, he finally gets to them, and they're all alive. He's trying to, as the ship's moving toward the shore, he's trying to count all of them. Finally, he gets close enough to be able to yell and be understood. And he says, "Are you all well?" And Frank Wild is second in command. He says, "We are all well, boss." And Shackleton, obviously, he says that's the greatest moment of his entire. That's the moment where he was able to take a deep breath and say, "I got my men all out alive." And that's what he had to put himself through. And he winds up dying of a heart attack at age 46. So you've put yourself through a lot when you can manage that, I would say.
All right, you want to do the talk out?
Yeah, I can do the talk out.
All right, bud.
Thank you very much indeed for everyone who joined us. Great having you as always. I hope you found the content edifying and thought-provoking. We'll see you next time. We do this every week. It gets better and better every Sunday, 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific. Have a great day and a pleasant tomorrow and a fantastic week. See you next time. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.